Before I start, I want to explain something. Every time I use an SJW term, I'm putting up air quotes. These are not real words, so I refuse to treat them any other way. If you hear a bit of inflection in my voice that sounds derogatory or sarcastic, rest assured I'm using air quotes. Now let's get into it. The SJW and intersectional feminist movements are all about labels and groups. Identity politics to the core, with social Marxist dogma flowing like milk and honey in the promised land. Defending the oppressed and marginalized is their rallying cry, or shriek to put a fine point on it, and you're out of the cool kids club if you feel one iota against their norm. Parenthetically, oppressed and marginalized are defined so arbitrarily that the words have lost all practical meaning. So, what does this have to do with anything? I propose the SJWs and Feminist Alliance almost succeeded in making a new group, so exalted, so above the highest heights that no one would ever supersede it on the oppression scale. I'm of course talking about the transsexual community. And if the intersectional comrades had succeeded, they would have made Muslims a step below trans people on the oppression scale. Follow me down the rabbit hole if you dare. The process started with the introduction of cisgendered, cis for short, into the SJW parlance. Cis, if you're a person who's only exposed to real language, means denoting or relating to a molecular structure in which two particular atoms or groups lie on the same side of a given plane in the molecule. The SJW definition is someone who identifies with the sex they were born as. Simple, right? Of course not. We're talking intersectionality here. Cis in real terms means you're normal. Full stop. Now, you might be thinking, why do they need a new word for people who are the same as 99.97% of the rest of the population? Simple. Tumblrettes who feel they do not identify as their biological sex, or are gender fluid, which means they belong to an insane hodgepodge of blatantly made-up genders, needed a word to differentiate themselves from the rest of the population. They couldn't handle the thought of being seen as a minority, which equals an oppressed class, so they made the vast majority of the world accept a label that makes them an outside group. See how it works? Neither do I. Well, what does this have to do with the theme of this video? Trust me, I'm laying the groundwork. Once cis became established in the crazy community, rallying cries like "Die white cis scum" became ever so popular in the Tumblr echo chamber. How these people know of a way to populate the planet without cis people is not understood. There are some researchers who found that these people believe artificial sperm is right around the corner. Yay, science! The next step in raising the trans community out of its social ghetto was trans rights. Suddenly it seemed that trans people were getting the Jim Crow treatment, and that had to stop. The fact that the trans community itself hadn't seemed to notice being oppressed didn't factor into this activism on their behalf. No matter, it's not like their opinion counts. Calls for legislation specifically on behalf of transgenders spread like wildfire. And it worked. In New York City, it became illegal to refer to any person by a pronoun with which they did not identify. A whopping $125,000 to $250,000 fine can be levied if you don't address a person by their preferred pronoun, which can be as simple as he or she, or ramping up the stupidity to include fake pronouns like Z and here. And once again, in some corners, the trans community was left shaking their heads in wonderment. Finally, we come to Bathroom Gate. This one is serious. In March of 2016, North Carolina passed a bullshit law making it illegal for someone to use a bathroom if it did not correspond to their biological sex. Meaning, if you're a trans woman, sex reassignment surgery or no, you have to use the men's bathroom. The reasoning behind this law was, you guessed it, won't somebody think of the women's and children? The thought of grown men sharing bathrooms of women and children was too much to bear. Rape culture, am I right? Despite all this uproar over labels, acceptance, and laws, trans people have in some sense faded back into the twilight. Why? I see 3 reasons. First off, trans people didn't ask to be made special. This was all the idea of Tumblr diving, gender fluid, and trans trending idiots. See YouTube's own Milo Stewart for an example of the latter. It's dumb to take up the cause of people who couldn't care less about that cause. Plus, since part of the trans community didn't agree with the SJW hissy fits being thrown for them, these people were blocked out because, as we all know, not agreeing with SJWs is verboten and results in ostracization. Second, not everyone in the SJW plus feminist intersexual community is accepting of trans people. Trans exclusionary radical feminists are a real thing. They believe trans women are nothing more than the hated men's trying to pass as women and want nothing to do with them. It's hard to hold up the banner for trans folk when a group within the group preaching acceptance despises them. This may not be as bad as it seems, as TERFs are not true feminists. Just ask the dictionary. Third, and most importantly, Muslims have religion behind them, but transgenders don't. Why, you may ask, would a majority atheist community like the regressive left fight on the side of a religion, especially one as sadistic and regressive as Islam? No one knows outside of Tumblr, and even there, I bet if you directly ask someone, why do you support Islam? The answer you'd get is, fuck you, you cis-white, heteronormative, male, racist Islamophobe. Cis-white male being the ultimate insult, of course. So there it is. For a brief moment in time, trans people were the oppressed du jour. If it wasn't for their damned lack of need of spotlight, inconsiderateness towards the intersectionals who were just trying to take over, help the community, and not being a persecuted religious minority, they might have become the newest and bestest top rung on the oppression scale, and relegated Muslims to the derision they deserve. Maybe atheists will be next. Watch the skies. And now, an anecdote. When I was a freshman in college, there was a guy who sat across from me in speech class who seemed different. He wore loose shirts, he didn't have any facial hair, and his features were rather effeminate. Now, as a freshman in college, I didn't know what it was like out there in the real world, as I came from a very small town, so I paid no mind. The next semester, this guy was gone. Again, people come and go. I didn't think much of it. Fast forward a year later. I'm working a booth in the speech communications building when up walks this knockout blonde. Everything about her was perfect. And as I stared up at this goddess, I saw a glimpse of someone I'd known before. It was that guy from speech class. I was taken aback for a moment because I'd never seen this kind of thing before. I knew trans people existed, but I'd certainly never come across a person who had switched genders. I looked up and I said, "Man, you look great!" And she smiled and said, "Well, thank you." I asked her if she wanted some literature from the booth. She said yes, and we parted ways. I found out later her name was Kathy, and I have not been able to forget her since. Thank you for your attention.